Ed Gein. His name would become synonymous with terror, the butcher of Plainfield.
Gein was digging up bodies, but what he did with the body parts is extraordinary. Gein was so enmeshed with his mother that he wanted to become his mother.
Ed Gein had inspired Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Ed Gein was Norman Bates, and Norman Bates was Ed Gein.
What he was like as a person was extremely unique. You see in his house, too, it's an exteriorization of his own mind.
What did you intend to do with their body? What parts would you take home? Who helped you when you got about the video? So you enjoyed what you were doing? You didn't think.
This is the story of Ed Gein. August 27, 1906, La Crosse County, Wisconsin, a quiet town, would soon be home to one of history's most notorious figures. Ed Gein, born to Augusta and George Gein, grew up in a household that was anything but ordinary. Dominated by fanatically religious mother, Ed's upbringing was oppressive. Augusta filled young Ed's mind with dark tales of sin, evil, and the dangers of women. She preached purity and fair in equal measure, but Ed adored her, a devotion that would fuel his later descent into madness. While other children formed friendships, Ed remained painfully shy, a social outcast often bullied by his peers. At home, his father's alcoholism left Augusta to rule the family with an iron grip. In this secluded environment, Ed's worldview twisted into something far more sinister than anyone could imagine. Then, the tragedies began. In 1940, Ed's father passed away, followed by his brother Henry in a mysterious fire in 1944. But it was 1945, when Augusta herself died, that Ed's world collapsed. With his mother gone, his last tether to reality snapped, and the horrors to come would unfold. After Augusta's death, Ed Gein's isolation deepened. Alone on the decaying family farm, he withdrew from the world, slipping further into a dark obsession. On November 16, 1957, Plainfield's small-town tranquility was shattered when Bernice Warden, the local hardware store owner, vanished. A trail of blood led investigators to the Gein farm, and what they discovered there would haunt them forever. Bernice Warden's decapitated body hung like a grotesque trophy in Ed Gein's shed. But this was only the beginning. Inside the house, authorities uncovered a scene straight from a nightmare. Skulls turned into bows, human skin stitched into lampshades, and a suit crafted from the flesh of the dead. The quiet loner, Ed Gein, had become the embodiment of horror. And what was most disturbing, many of these grisly artifacts weren't just for recent murders. They came from bodies Ed had exhumed from local graveyards. He had been robbing the dead, creating a macabre collection that defied all understanding.
He lived in this old, dark, dark world. You can imagine walking into his house and seeing how he was living. His house was a house of horrors.
Ed was quickly arrested for the murder of Bernice Warden. But what he revealed to investigators was far more chilling than anyone had anticipated. Calmly, almost childlike in his demeanor, Ed described his acts of grave robbing, his gruesome handwork, and his grisly trophies. The media descended upon Plainfield, turning the sleepy town into the center of national horror story. As details of Ed's crimes emerged, the nation recoiled in shock. How could such atrocities exist in the midst, committed by an otherwise unassuming man?
For me, in my work, I identify trophies as like body parts, like an eyeball, fingers. Ed Gein had a compulsion to make belts and jackets and bowls and things. This is a way that he could always have his mother in his fantasy world.
In 1957, Gein was declared legally insane and unfit for trial, and he was sent to a mental institution. But in 1968, a court determined he could stand trial, and he was found guilty of first-degree murder due to his mental state. However, he would remain in the hospital for the rest of his life. Within the walls of the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, Ed Gein became an unlikely model patient, quiet, cooperative, and even well-liked by the staff.
I believe that Ed Gein was deeply traumatized as a child. We know that schizophrenia develops earlier on, like in your late teens, early 20s, and manifests itself then. It's possible that he had moments, because of his trauma from his mother, he could have experienced schizophrenia.
He displayed none of the monstrous behavior that once terrified the nation. Yet, behind this calm facade lay the mind of a man whose actions would forever be marked by horror. He spoke with eerie detachment about his crimes, his motivations, and his fascination with human anatomy, as if discussing an everyday hobby rather than acts of sheer depravity. Even as he lived out his remaining years in relative peace, Ed Gein's name was cemented in the annals of American criminal history. His story fascinated the public, spawning books, articles, and eventually films that blurred the lines between fact and fiction. On July 26, 1984, at the age of 77, Ed Gein died of cancer. He was buried in the same cemetery where he had once unearthed bodies for his gruesome craft, next to the mother he had so adored. But even in death, Ed's story was far from over. Ed Gein's crimes inspired some of the most iconic figures in horror: Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. These characters, terrifying, disturbed, and unforgettable, were rooted in the real-life horror of Ed Gein's acts. His legacy, dark and twisted, continues to influence horror to this day. Gein's name has become synonymous with the unspeakable, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the most ordinary of places. After his death, the fascination with Ed Gein endures. His crimes, so grotesque and unimaginable, continue to capture the public's morbid curiosity. Horror films, novels, and documentaries endlessly dissect his life, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Psychologists and criminologists study Gein's case as a chilling example of how trauma, isolation, and mental illness can wrap the human mind. What led Ed Gein down such a dark path? The answer may never be fully understood, but his story continues to provide insight into depths of human depravity. And in Plainfield, the quiet town he once terrorized, the shadow of Ed Gein still lingers, a grim reminder of the horrors that once lurked just beneath the surface.